Back in 2020, I joined this organization, and I quickly discovered there was a lot of chaos and no real control of what they had and didn't have, and what they provided to their users and not. I specifically remember having a meeting with the director of finance. Let's call him Dave for this purpose. Dave is your typical finance guy, really good with numbers and finances, not so good with IT and IT systems. However, he did know one thing, and that was that the ERP system wasn't working quite well. And occasionally, we had to reboot their systems. And rebooting the ERP system was not without risk, because we never knew if it actually would boot up again. So Dave, in these meetings, he was always complaining about the system not working correctly, and always being worried about not being able to send invoices. And can you imagine the feeling of coming to work every day, not knowing whether or not you'll be able to generate invoices? That's horrible. To make matters even worse, the only guy that were able to provide some technical support for this system, he was a retired guy living up in the forest in Sweden. So he had his income set, at least. So today I'm here to talk about how we transform this system from chaos to a better platform with control of who's using what, and where we're actually able to reboot systems without having them go down, and being able to provide support for them as well. So my name is Leif. I'm a senior consultant with a company called Novanet, and Novanet is a Oslo-based consultancy company. We do a lot of .NET development and cloud development and architecture. For myself, I usually work as a tech lead, and that's my role today, tech lead and architect. Unfortunately, that means that I don't get to write as much code as I would like these days, but I enjoy the role anyway because I get a lot of responsibilities. So in this talk, we're going to cover a little bit of the history of how we ended up with the system, with the complete chaos. It's necessary for you all to know what kind of steps you can take to avoid ending up in these situations, or maybe you even recognize some of the failures we had, so that you can see whether or not you need to renew something of yourself. I'm going to cover 5 strategies that I found very useful in working with the transformation process. We're going to go into 3 big challenges, because as you all know, transformation does not come without any challenges. As a little bit of a hint now, there's only one technical challenge, the rest is not technical. We're going to take a look into how the architecture looks these days and what kind of steps we've taken there. And we're going to look into our tech stack at the end, just so you can get an idea of what we're doing and maybe bring some ideas back on your own. Now we're going to start with a brief history lesson. So before we dive into the old architecture, we're going to have to look into a bit of the organization itself. So as you can see from the drawing here, we have a central federation on top, and we have several connected federations. What you need to understand here is that the central federation is a company of its own. They have their own company or an organization number, and they are controlled on its own. And the connected federations are also their own companies, so they're not connected as the central federation. They do not own the connected federations. And the connected federations, again, can have multiple sub-federations, which may or may not be their own companies. So you may have a sub-federation which are a company, and you have a sub-federation that's not a company. And across all of these, they are working with the same systems, mostly. Because the central federation here, they offer shared services. So they may offer CRM systems, emailing, and similar for the connected federations to use. However, the connected federations do not need to use them. They can venture out, find their own vendors if they like. So this, of course, creates some concerns. Over time, and when I first joined, this is kind of like what the architecture looked like. At the time where this was created, obviously it had already been improved a little bit, but as you can see here, there's a lot of arrows going everywhere. And perhaps the most important thing to take a note of here is the green box at the bottom, which is the customer relationship management system, which is where most of the users were working, because you need a common place to put everything about your customers, and that's where they were doing all their day-to-day business. At the start, they allowed everyone to start accessing this programmatically. So if a connected federation needed to use some data, they would connect directly into the CRM. Eventually, they figured out that this is a bad way to do it because we don't know who's using what, we don't know who's changing the data, and we need to make some modifications, which is when they introduced an API which was supposed to solve everything. But as you can see, the straws into the CRM system were already in place, which kind of made it difficult to replace with a single API. To make matters even worse, the red box here is their own home-built HR system, where they gathered all information about employees, they assigned roles to them, and they were doing a whole bunch of stuff. There was even financial information inside the HR system. So you can start to see here that this is causing a lot of pain when you're starting to try to renew everything here. And you had also different external partners, and you had websites that require data. And once they got requirements in for new stuff, they might add a new API, which basically would do the same as a similar API, which they already had. So there was no real control of what they had or what they didn't have. And there was no real control of who owns what kind of data. So you could have employee data in the CRM system or in the HR system, and it could be duplicated, it could be not. It was impossible to say. It's a mess to work with. So how did we get here? Well, for starters, the developers and the IT department used to have a yes, we can do that attitude. And I really get that, because we're programmers, developers. We like to say we can do things. We know we can solve almost any problem by coding some stuff, and we can deliver almost any kind of data with coding some stuff. However, when doing this and not thinking about the big picture, you might end up with a chaotic system. Like I said, we had APIs that were existing. For instance, our company data API, which delivered company information. If they needed to, say, get that information in a bit different format, you could potentially end up with two APIs with the same data, just in different versions. And there are several cases where we had this happening. I think that, yes, we can do that attitude stemmed from the fact that they had these connected federations which were able to go out to different vendors. And I think the central federation kind of had a mentality of, we need to deliver on what they request, otherwise they won't pay us money. So it's a money issue here and leadership issue. We'll use our CRM for that. And that's another common thing we have seen here, that the CRM system is where the users are. This is where they're working. And I get the idea that you want to have the users not having to switch applications they're working with, because it's convenient. And I'm not saying that it's wrong to use the CRM as an user interface. However, the way they did it was to put all the data in the CRM system, modifying the core entities and the core database. And as you probably can imagine, in the long term, this ends up with a system where you're not able to do any updates. There's no easy way for us to move the CRM system into the cloud if that's what we want to do, because all the core data sets have been modified so much that it's impossible to recognize. Combine this with having multiple companies working on the CRM system over a span of multiple years, you'll end up with data fields that no one really understands what's supposed to be. And then there's the final thing. What do you think we should do? Having all these connected federations that are able to input and voice their opinions on stuff means that there's going to be a lot of opinions all the time with whatever you do. And this is going to cause the processes to be very long and tedious. We're going to have no real clear direction of where we want to go. There's going to be scope creeps, and they never had any real written requirements. I remember also when I started there was this project that had been going on for about 6 to 8 months. They were supposed to take some data from a third-party vendor and generate invoices from it. And that sounds simple enough, as far as invoicing can be simple. But you take some data about customers and you input it into the ERP system. But at the time when I got there, not a single line of code had been written, and not a single requirement was written. It was all just talks about it and emails going back and forth. So I came in and I structurized it, and we sat down together with Dave, our finance guy, and we managed to crank out some code and get it working as they wanted in a matter of a short period of time. Over the long run, though, this is kind of like boiling a frog from cold water. You know, when you boil a frog from cold water, it's not going to notice what's going on before it's too late. And I think the similar pattern has happened here. So, what are the 5 strategies I found most efficient to work in the transformation process? We're going to start off by talking about abstractions. And as developers, we kind of think like abstractions in code. So you're abstracting away your database layer or similar. But in a process like this, we need to lift it to a higher level. The key here is that you want to be able to change out your core systems without the consumers noticing what's happening. And by that I mean, if we have a website that displays some data from the CRM system, we need to be able to replace the CRM system without the website actually noticing this. So we started going on about abstracting away the core systems by creating smaller services that provided kind of the same data, and then we were able to separate the layers here, which kind of made sense for us. This also means that we're able to filter out the data from the core systems. So as you can imagine, over a decade or so with the old CRM system, there's going to be a lot of trash data. Trash in, trash out, right? So if we already had some idea of what kind of data is trash, what kind of data we're going to use going forwards, we can filter away the trash. And eventually, when we're moving to a new core system, we're going to be able to reuse the data from the service and put it in as a starting point for the new core system. So this makes it easier to move data and migrate core systems to something new and better. But doing abstractions alone isn't enough. Like I said, you didn't see that on the architecture, but it was many systems. And like I said, we didn't really know who was using what or what we were even offering. So we had to start to take a look at what are we actually going to offer as a central organization. Are we just offering a website? Are we going to offer HR systems, CRM systems, or similar? And we started by looking into everything we had, all the platforms. We went on a discovery and created an Excel sheet, which was pretty long, pretty awful to look at. But we actually knew then what kind of software we had and what kind of software the users were using. Next, we need to start looking into who is actually going to use what. Who is using it today and who needs to use it tomorrow. By doing this, we could then start to look at patterns, and we could start defining what kind of offerings are we going to provide. Do we want to have a basic package? Do we want to give a premium package? Are the connected federations going to be able to pick and choose what they want to use? And we ended up by generating kind of service offerings which contain the most used packages as a basic, such as email, office package, finance systems, etc. And then we built upon that. So they could purchase in for a smaller amount for the basic package and add on whatever they needed after that. In addition to having more control of what we're actually offering, this gave the additional benefit of knowing what was lesser used. So, for instance, we had this subscription module, which seemed to be very big because we had thousands of subscriptions and even tens of thousands of subscribers. So it seemed like this is a big deal. We're going to have to support subscriptions. However, it turned out it was just a few, like 2 or 3 of the connected federations that were actually using this. And then we had to ask, does it make sense for us to keep on supporting this? And we figured out, no, it doesn't. So we could venture out to the connected federations and tell them, this subscription thing you're using here, that's going to go away. We're going to shut it down, and we're not going to provide something else for you. These are the options we've looked into, so these are the options you can go to, but we're not going to do anything about it, except maybe make an integration if you need that, but that's going to cost you money. So it's an easier way for us then to remove systems so that we have less to support going forward. Now that you have a service offering and you started abstracting away, you can start to think about the big picture going forward. We started quite early to try to see, okay, we're in, 2022 or something, and we need to figure out how is the system going to look like in 2027? What's the system going to have to look like for us to be able to innovate quicker and move things quicker along? So we sat down and we drew a picture of how the architecture was going to look like, and tried to kind of figure out the boundaries of each service and what kind of service we're going to use. Are we going to be cloud? Are we going to still be on-premise? And things like that. However, by having a clear long-term vision doesn't necessarily make it easy to work in the short or medium term. So we'd have requests coming in to us. You need to modify this and this kind of data in the CRM system, for instance, because we need to be able to show it on the internet. And that's a valid request. However, we had already said that we're not going to modify our CRM system anymore. We do not want to do any more changes to it because we know that we're going to replace it shortly. So we kind of had to figure out what are the common patterns of requests coming in so we could handle them. We did this by starting to ask questions. What is this data going to be used for? Is it only going to be presented on the web? Is it going to be used for you in the CRM system while working with the customers? And is it going to be used in the long term? Are you actually going to be needing this kind of data in 5-10 years? Doing this, of course, then allowed us to create rules. So we could say that, okay, if you answer this to all these questions, we're going to put it on the web in the content management system instead of putting it into the CRM. If you know that you're going to use this data going forwards, maybe we should have it on our own service and enrich the data from the CRM system before going out. So these kind of rules was something we created and used a lot during the process. Now, where do you start? I remember there's an old riddle from when I went to school that said, how do you eat an elephant? Piece by piece. And the same thing goes for renewing your system. It's going to be a tremendous amount of work. There's no doubt about that. And if you start with everything at once, you're obviously going to fail because unless you have a large team. But it's going to be a bad idea because you're not going to be able to utilize what you're doing during this process. We figured that we needed to start off by working on the foundations because we're not going to decorate our kitchen before we have walls, and we're not going to build walls before we have that foundation in place. So this means stuff like building up a platform, figure out if we're going to use cloud or not. We're going to have to define standards before moving on, and similar. We started off by working with the financial systems because we needed to ensure that we could still generate income. Otherwise, we would probably have to shut down before we could get to it. And this allowed us then to create smaller services and start figuring out how the pieces were going to fit together, which was quite nice. A final strategy we've used a lot has been to shut down services as you go. A lot of the problems we saw came because we never knew if a service was still being used, who was using it, and what it was being used for. So we tried to look at what we're replacing and figure out what can we shut down as we go. So just a few weeks ago, I shut down an Azure SQL database that costed around 50,000 Norwegian crowns a year. And to this day, I still haven't received a single complaint about it. So that kind of tells you the story, and that had been running for 6+ years. So that kind of tells the story of why it's important to shut down things. And this also goes for if you're doing prototyping or similar. You need to shut down once you're done using it, because then you have control of your spendings and everything. So when we try to shut down services, we ensured that we had created something new that we were going to replace it, whether it was data retrieval or some logic that we needed to replace. And then we sent out a message to everyone that could possibly be using it. And we said, this is the new service. It's meant to replace this, 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 and this. So please make modifications wherever you need. And in 4 weeks, we're going to shut down the old one. Sometimes, of course, people came to us and said, OK, we're going to need 6 weeks. OK, perfect. Then we know who's using it. Sometimes no one answered, and we shut it down, and nothing happened. Sometimes we shut things down, and we get a really angry email Monday morning asking why on earth this service doesn't work anymore. And yeah, angry emails are never fun, but again, you then know who's using it. So we've looked at the strategies. Now we're going to have to look into some challenges that you may face while working on a transition like this. And the first, and maybe the most important challenge is it's going to be a costly affair if you're going to renew your entire system. So a piece of advice, if you do not have to do it, don't go ahead and rewrite everything, because it's going to be expensive. So first and foremost, who is going to pay for everything? For us, it meant asking, is it going to be the central federation who kind of owns services? Is it going to be the connected federations? Or is it going to be a joint venture? That's a question, obviously, we as technologists maybe don't want to answer, but we need to have a say in it, at least, I think, and guide the leadership as to where they might put the pressure. Second, we need to start looking into return of investment. When I first started going for upgrades and everything, I came from a technical perspective. I always saw, this is so faulty, we do not know how we're going to fix this application, this API, or anything. So we need to do something to be able to move past this. We need to rewrite it. And the IT director was just looking at me and going, OK, so what? Isn't that something you can just fix? So once I kind of got into the mindset of, I need to show the business side what the value for them is going to be, it's easier. And to do this, I kind of had to look into estimations, get a feeling of how much is it going to how long time is it going to take to create something new for this. And I never went into specific numbers, but it's more of a range, so they have a gut feeling of how much it's going to cost. Second, we had to start tracking how much time I was spending on fixing problems with the systems we're going to replace. For instance, our identity and access management. When we started to track it, we saw that we're spending almost a full-time employee every week just fixing problems that came along all the time, every week. And when you can start putting numbers to this, it's easier to convince the business side to accept going for a change. Of course, when it comes to economy, it's, again, a leadership perspective, but we as developers, we can help them and guide them in the right direction by providing the input they need. And we need to realize that this is more of a business thing than technical thing. So, next on, an important thing to realize is when you're starting to transform your systems, you're going to have to slow down progress on everything else, or a lot of things, other things. Users, they may be used to getting new features almost immediately when requesting it. They may be used to getting bug fixes quite quickly. And this is not something that's going to happen unless you have a really large team and we're able to say that these people are supposed to work on the old systems while these people work on the new system. We were never that many people. We had, I don't know, maybe 15 people in total across the teams. So we knew that we're going to have to slow down everything else in order for us to build something new. And we're going back again to the leadership thing, because this is something the leadership needs to convey in order for the business side to understand. But again, we can help out with that. And the technical challenge that we found very challenging is whether or not we should fix bugs or live with it during the process. So the ERP system I mentioned, once we first started working on something new and replacing it, we started getting reports from some users. They were not able to put projects onto the invoices or orders. And of course, this is kind of a critical bug because that means they're not able to send out the invoices. So the income would stop. We looked into it to see, is this a quick fix? But we quickly realized, due to the nature of the beast, that it would take us a long time to figure out even what the problem was, even which system to start searching for the fault. Because there was a lot of arrows, as you remember from the architecture, a lot of arrows going everywhere, and we didn't know where to start. So we had to ask the business side, what can we do to circumvent this? And the finance department, they figured out that we can change this manually. And it's not a lot of people reporting this issue, so for those few, we can do it manually in the period while we're working on a new system. So in general, whether or not you're going to fix a bug in the production system while you're working on transforming it, you have to look at how long is it going to take to fix the bug compared to the time you lose building something new. And are there any ways for you to manually overcome the bugs while working on it, and you can live with that? Then that's a compromise you have to make. So, until now, I have given you a rather theoretical lecture in change management, basically. So now we're going to take a look into the technical side and look into the tech stack which we've built over the period of time. And I guess you're all super excited now to see the new architecture, how it looks like. And here it is. This is obviously, as you can see, a very simplified model. I do not have any specifics in here because, again, we still have a lot of systems, but you need to get the kind of big picture idea here. So, as you can see from this here, we have a standardized platform which we can work on. And we now have clearly defined boundaries between each service. The consumers on top there, whether it's a web shop or website or external partners, they do not need to know whether or not it's Dynamics CRM or Salesforce CRM in the bottom from the data source. And all the services are event-driven, so we can send messages, and we have some authentication, of course. And this allows us to innovate quicker. We're able to build new services when we need to. We also have the luxury of knowing who the consumers are and knowing what they can access. We provide packages for the consumers that need to access APIs, so we have much, much better control now. We can also easily replace the core systems here, and we're working on that now with our CRM system being replaced. And that's a process that wouldn't be able to happen unless we already had the services on top to provide the data that the end users need, or the consumers need. So, we are of Microsoft. We have chosen Microsoft as our vendor for email services and Office packages, Office 365. And for us then, it was natural to move along with Microsoft Azure as our cloud platform. In the start, there was a lot of talk about being cloud agnostic, but in my opinion, being cloud agnostic kind of takes away the benefits of using the cloud. Maybe not so much these days when you have container apps and everything, but back when we started out, that wasn't as much in use. So it was kind of, we tried to avoid being cloud agnostic. So fortunately for me, we chose to go with Azure and are able to use the services there. So as you can see, we're using Azure API management as a developer portal and developer API access point. This allows us to have one place for everyone to consume our APIs, where we get a lot of control of who's using it. We create packages and products there, and we generate subscriptions for those who need it. So there's a lot of control, and a lot of control we didn't have before. We're using Azure Service Bus as a messaging platform, and we've chosen to go with PostgreSQL as our database primarily. And that's just due to costs. It's cheaper than Azure SQL, and it provides the same features we need. We also do have some NoSQL databases or document databases, but we're not using that in very large degree. We're primarily using Azure Function Apps for messaging and Azure Web Apps for APIs and business logic. And we're using Entra ID and Azure AD B2C for identity and access management. I think the most fun technology here is AI search from Azure, which we're using to search across all data sources, and it's quite convenient to use it. From the very start, we knew that when we're going to start building in the cloud, we're going to have to use some form of infrastructure as code. At the start, we tested out Terraform, and mostly because I was used to it and I was in charge, so it made sense to start with it and test. However, the team wasn't really comfortable using state management and the state handling there, so we had to do something else. Next thing we tested was ARM templates. And show of hands, how many has used ARM templates in Azure? There's a few hands. Keep the hands up if you like working with ARM templates. Yeah, no one. Thought so. ARM templates is horrible to work with. Long JSON files, which is, not really good to work with. So we ended up with using Microsoft Bicep for our infrastructure as code, and it's given us a lot of the ability to create modules which are standardized for everyone to use. And you might ask, why create modules for this and not just use it directly? And the reason for that is we needed a way to standardize our platforms or our resources. We needed a way to ensure that every team created resources in the same manner with the same tagging and the same naming conventions that we had decided to go for. This way we can ensure that we have cost control and we know who owns the services in Azure and similar. As for our code, we deliver mostly with .NET 8 with minimal APIs. And we have structured the code in a manner that's been written about from a colleague of mine in the blog post you see there. We have structured the code in a way that makes sense to us, and it means that we have standardized it. This means then again that the developers are able to move across repos and easily be able to navigate in new projects. So if I were to work on a project and then I had to move on to something else that I hadn't seen before, I would know where to start looking for features, and if I needed to add something new or find a bug or something, I wouldn't have to struggle to figure out where it was laying, because we all do the same. We're using, like I said, function apps for processing updates and web apps for APIs and business logic. And we are, to some extent, sharing model packages across teams. So we create NuGet packages to share so that others don't have to recreate everything all the time. As for testing and DevOps, we are not using a lot of unit tests. And this is because we are mostly doing integrations. There are some services that require unit testing because they have some business logic, but for most of the time, we are relying on integration testing. This is, of course, then to ensure that we get the same data all the time and not break anything while we deploy something new. We're using test containers then to be able to mimic the actual environment we're using, so we don't get any faulty tests because of environment, such as in-memory databases or similar. And we're using Azure DevOps pipelines for build and deploy. And in the same fashion as we've created templates and everything for our microservices, we have done the same for the templates for pipelines. So that we have one set of standardized way of creating build and deploy pipelines, and we can move them across different projects. This then means that we can quite easily get up and running. We don't have to spend a few days trying to figure out what to do for our build and deploy. We can just copy that template and start using it directly. So basically, with all these standardizations, we've been able to move from using 3-4 days to generate a new service with a bare-bone application up and running in Azure to be able to use it in a day, which is quite nice. And we've also had a new team coming in now, and they needed to start building an integration, and they had the same experience where they could just take the packages we created, and they were up and running with a bare-bone application in a day. So it's a really nice place to be at. We log everything to Application Insight in Azure, and we have dashboards there which summarizes statuses, such as client secrets expiring, service health, and similar. So we have control of what's happening on our applications at all times. So these days, there are quite positive vibes in the office. Dave, our finance director, he is quite happy these days. He's not pale in his face anymore, and I'm guessing it's not just because he's getting sun in his face, but probably because the ERP system works and is able to send out invoices again in a stable fashion. The integrations we built and the platform we built is working really nice, and we're able to innovate quicker now. And we have a few projects now that are utilizing what we've built and showcases kind of what we're able to do now these days. And yeah, it's quite positive vibes. Of course, it's not so good for my retirement plan, so I have to find another way to figure out some income later when I want to move up to the forest. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the day so far and enjoy the rest of the evening. My name is Leif, and thank you very much.